bombshell Supreme Court leak.
This completely ignores the reality of women's lives. It's devastating.
A leaked draft Supreme Court opinion signals justices are poised to overturn Roe v. Wade, setting off an emotional debate over abortion.
Hoping more babies will be saved. That's what I'm looking for.
As some conservatives celebrate the news, Republican lawmakers focus on the source of the leak.
The Republicans have been working toward this day for decades, so they could have a majority on the bench who would accomplish something that the majority of Americans do not want.
Meanwhile, outraged Democrats look for ways to protect abortion rights and rally voters ahead of the midterms. Next.
This is Washington Week. Corporate funding is provided by Consumer Cellular. Additional funding is provided by Ku and Patricia YUEN through the YUEN Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose HIRSCHEL and Andy SHREEVES, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. Once again from Washington, moderator Yamiche Alcindor.
Good evening and welcome to Washington Week. This week, a leaked draft Supreme Court decision sent shockwaves across the nation. The bombshell scoop by Politico revealed 5 Supreme Court justices support overturning Roe v. Wade. Since 1973, the landmark case has federally protected a woman's right to an abortion. In the document, Justice Samuel Alito wrote, "Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. It is time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives." Chief Justice John Roberts confirmed the authenticity of the text, but said it is not final. He also announced an investigation into the leak. If Roe is overturned, about half of the states in our country would likely ban abortion or heavily restrict it. Opponents of abortion rights applauded the news.
Ultimately, you're murdering a child when you make that choice to abort, and we don't believe that murdering a human is a choice.
President Biden had this to say about the draft decision and the conservatives who support it.
What are the next things that are going to be attacked? Because this MAGA crowd is really the most extreme political organization that's existed in American history.
Joining me tonight to discuss this and more, Julia Ainsley, justice correspondent for NBC News. Josh Gerstein, senior legal affairs reporter for Politico. He is one of the reporters who broke the SCOTUS story and upended the entire week for all of us, of course. And joining me here in studio, Jonathan Martin, national political correspondent for the New York Times and co-author of the new book, This Will Not Pass, Trump, Biden, and the Battle for America's True Future. I should tell you that book's also been moving us around a lot this week in Washington. And Abby Phillip, of course, a good friend, anchor of Inside Politics Sunday and senior political correspondent for CNN. Thank you, all of you, for joining. This, of course, has been a busy, busy week. And Josh, we have you to thank for that. So I'm going to start with you. Talk a bit about what the significance of this decision would mean to women across this country and to our nation.
Well, it would basically end a federal constitutional right that's been recognized now for almost half a century since Roe versus Wade became the law of the land in 1973. There has been a guarantee that someone seeking an abortion had the right to do so. There could be certain limits on that. Over the years, the limits on that have gotten stricter, but there was still a federal constitutional right in every state in this country. And if Justice Alito's draft opinion that we reported and made public on Monday becomes the Supreme Court's final word on this issue, you'd have really a situation of abortion haves and have-nots across the country, where you would have many states where abortion was relatively widely available and probably about 26 states where abortion is banned or very, very sharply restricted. You would then have women either trying to get medication abortions in those states or possibly travel through what might develop as a kind of underground railroad to get them out of those states and into other states where they could get legal abortions. It'd be a pretty dramatic change in the availability of abortion across the country.
It would be a dramatic and really generational change. And I want to also ask you about some other reporting, which is that Chief Justice John Roberts said that there is going to be now an investigation. You told our reporters it's easier to say there's going to be an investigation than to carry one out. Talk about that and how vigorous you think the court will sort of look into this. And I also have to ask you, how worried are you about being targeted? Because, of course, this is your reporting that they will be looking into.
Well, Yamiche, the reason I say that it's difficult is leak investigations are always difficult in any type of situation. They're the kind of things that most people in law enforcement don't actually like to carry out. It's a lot of work, and oftentimes they end unsuccessfully. The Supreme Court, I think, is in a particularly awkward position to do this because they don't really have an investigative branch internally. There's no inspector general of the Supreme Court. It's not clear that there's any legal violation here, any criminal violation. It's not clear whether the Justice Department or the FBI are interested in getting involved in this investigation. And so the mechanics of how the court will go about actually carrying this out are entirely unclear. They do have a relatively small police force, but they basically patrol the grounds and keep order in the court during arguments. So we don't really know how it will play out. And as far as Politico itself, we're committed to defending the story and the anonymity of the person familiar with the proceedings here that provided us a copy of this Alito draft opinion, and we'll just have to see how things play out.
And Julia, you're, of course, a justice correspondent as well. I wonder what you've heard about this investigation, but also about the standing of Justice Roberts, who is the one, of course, pushing for this investigation.
Yeah, that's right. I was standing outside the Supreme Court in the throes of that crowd on Tuesday when we finally heard from the Chief Justice saying that indeed what Josh had reported, what he had posted on Politico, was authentic, although, as you say, clarifying it was not final. And what I think this calls into account is what is the Chief Justice's power now? And it shows that it's waning, right? So not only does, as Josh pointed out, the Supreme Court not have the ability like other agencies would to try to investigate and prosecute someone, but also his ability to control the court is definitely waning. With this leak, unprecedented in the history of the court, we've seen leaks of opinions before, but we've never seen leaks of drafts like this, which gets inside the court and really disrupts their deliberative process. That's what the Supreme Court prides itself on. It's one of the reasons why, much to the dismay of journalists, we've not been able to get cameras inside the Supreme Court, because they want to keep this really a sacred space where they can continue to have their own internal deliberations and not to issue an order until it's final. And then so as far as Chief Justice Roberts' power, it's again starting to change. As you can see from the fact that it was Alito who wrote this majority opinion, as he was asked to do by Justice Thomas. And nowhere nowhere do you really see the influence at all of Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts. And it's because the bench has changed. With the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the gain of Amy Coney Barrett, he's no longer that swing vote in the middle. He's actually on the left of now what is a majority right court.
And Abby, Julie just talked about the Supreme Court being sort of a sacred place. But what is this leaked decision, especially with John Roberts calling it a breach of trust of the court, what does it signal about the overall health of the Supreme Court and where things stand?
Yeah, I mean, the Supreme Court, like a lot of this country, is riven by political divides. I think there's no going away from that at this point. The court has been tainted by a political process involving putting the justices on the court in the first place. And now I think what we're seeing with the leak, though we don't know anything about where the leak came from, is that someone within the court, which is known for its secrecy and the way that it guards its process, is trying to influence that process by leaking. And I think that just tells us a lot about how the court sees itself and the role that it plays in American society. And no matter which side it came from, there was an attempt to as Julia put it, to disrupt the deliberative process. That disruption was intentional. I'm not sure, though, that whoever did this, the outcome might be exactly as they expected, because when things become public like this, the political consequences, I think, are a little bit more unpredictable. And I think that's what we're going to be living through over the next few months.
Certainly. And Jonathan, you told our producers that it's sort of a myth that the Supreme Court was above politics.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that
Sure.
and sort of where this leaves the court, given how partisan the issue of abortion is.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the recent history of the country, this notion has taken hold that these are these sort of apolitical figures who don a black robe and become totally above the political fray and don't even think about politics. And obviously, that's not true. I mean, if you look at who appoints them and their voting records, they tend to fall on fairly partisan lines. And it's also fairly factually inaccurate that the court has been apolitical. The history of the court is filled with politicians. We had a former president who served on the Supreme Court, William Howard Taft. We had figures, Earl Warren was the governor of California, who obviously became a chief justice of the court. So we've long had a political influence on the court. The appointees of the court have been shaped by political calculations of the president at the time. So I think it's a little unsettling to have the suggestion that somehow this is not a sort of political institution. Of course it is. It's part of the government, so therefore it's political. But I do think, Yamiche, that if the decision does come in June, and it's basically what we've read here, that is going to offer Democrats something that they have lacked this year, which is a lever to energize the voters who have shown very little interest so far in this midterm, and the voters, frankly, that have sort of faded from Joe Biden, too. You know, Joe Biden won the election in part because younger voters, especially, were appalled by Donald Trump and rallied to him. But without the Trump comparison, younger voters have not been terribly enamored of Joe Biden for the last year. This could be a way for Democrats to get younger voters back to the polls, back more engaged in Democratic politics in a way that has not happened the last year.
And the midterms issues of this is definitely something we're going to jump into and dig into. I do want to ask Josh, though, because Friday night, Justice Clarence Thomas said the court, quote, cannot be bullied. Talk about the politics of that, given what this justice is saying.
Well, Chief Justice Roberts said something very similar just a day earlier. He said that he called the leak absolutely appalling. But then again, he said it wouldn't affect their deliberations or their schedule or anything along those lines. With due respect to the justices, the notion that this won't affect the process at all seems completely impossible to me. Even if it doesn't sway any votes, Justice Alito now has to confront the fact that any change he makes to his opinion from here on out, we're going to know. People are going to be able to put these documents up side by side when the decision comes out, probably at the end of June, and see what was changed and maybe see which justices agreed with that portion or didn't agree with that portion. Even down to the footnotes, people will be examining them. So it's sort of an observer effect kind of situation here. Simply bringing your eyes onto the process alters the process. Maybe it doesn't change the outcome, but there's no question that the deliberations the justices have on this case from here on out simply have to be affected, whether they want to admit it or not.
And talking about sort of the effect of this, we've been talking about the politics of it, but this week I was in Mississippi and Louisiana talking to Americans about the draft decision. Shannon Brewer is the director of the only abortion clinic in Mississippi. It is, of course, the one at the center of this case.
I don't have any hope with anything pertaining to our judicial system. I have no hope in Congress right now because this should never be. This should never have been, and we should have never gotten to this point.
And in Louisiana, I talked to 32-year-old Lillian Newton. She's had 3 abortions and has since become a worker at the clinic that provided her care.
Had I not had abortion access when I was at the age of 24, 25, debating my life path, I would have been completely lost. I don't know how I would have made it through an unplanned pregnancy.
I also talked to opponents of abortion rights who told me they want to provide more resources for women to deal with unwanted pregnancies. Abby, I want to come to you. What's your sense of who's going to be most impacted if Roe v. Wade is overturned?
Well, there's no question that the women who are in a position to want an abortion in the first place are going to be affected. We've already seen the effects of that in most recently in the state of Texas, where they passed a restrictive abortion law, and it's resulted in women leaving Texas and going to other states. There's a practical impact of it, whether you support abortion rights or whether you don't. There's no question that women are caught in the middle here. I think a lot there was kind of a debate happening among some conservatives about whether overturning Roe would have a significant effect or not. And some argued that, well, there really aren't that many abortions happening in this country anyway, so rolling back Roe is not going to make a difference. But there's a reason that this debate has dominated American politics for 50 plus years. And it's because there is a sort of, there's an impact to this that deals with women and that people on both sides care incredibly deeply about. I don't think it's true that the effect of rolling back Roe would be non-existent. There are, over a dozen states where they have laws already on the books that would completely outlaw abortion, and then many more that would be able to pass those laws. So the effect would be pretty sweeping and pretty significant.
And Yamiche, if I could, I think it would just add to the sort of red versus blue dynamic that we've been living with in this country for really the last 15 years, which President Trump obviously accelerated, this patchwork of not just laws, but really culture and values between red and blue America. And in some cases, even within states themselves. We obviously have a book out this week that we sort of talk about in the book, just what this country has become and how the two parties have pulled further and further apart, in which they're sort of talking in opposite directions. And I think this would be a vivid example of a sort of country in which you would have entire regions of the country where abortion is illegal, and people would obviously have to sort of get on a plane for abortion access. I mean, that really captures the sort of two Americas dynamic that all of us have been covering for the last 10 years.
To be clear, that is not how the country operates right now, because most Americans have some access to abortion, and most Americans are in the ideological middle on this issue.
And I want to ask you a quick follow-up question, Abby, which is the director of the only abortion clinic in Mississippi, who she said overwhelmingly serves women of color, overwhelmingly serves women who are living below the poverty line. She said she has no faith in Congress, no faith in Washington. I wonder what you make of that, given the fact that Jonathan's talking about this red and blue America, but this woman who's living the center says, well, politics aren't going to help us at all.
Well, she's not wrong about that. In the 49 years that Roe has been the law of the land, neither side has been able to codify a federal law that either restricts abortion or codifies the tenets of Roe. Why is that? Even though we've gone through periods of supermajorities in the House and in the Senate, and the presidency being held by one party, it's because they have not been able to come to a consensus on this issue, even within the political parties. So she's not wrong that the political process has actually been very broken on this issue, and Roe has kind of deferred the country dealing with that for 49 years.
And Julia, you were outside the Supreme Court. You saw the energy on both sides. I wonder what you make of sort of the ability to sustain that energy, both on the Republican side or on the Democratic side, given what you saw this week.
Yeah, I think it was a foreshadowing of what's to come, whether that's in June or when we finally get this opinion, and when it comes out not leaked from Politico, when it's finally final. What I saw was a deep division. I saw people getting in each other's faces. I stood there as the police, the Capitol Police, at the request of the Supreme Court police, put up barriers which split the two sides. They asked everyone who was for abortion access on one side, and then the pro-life, the anti-abortion activists on the other side. They felt they had to separate this crowd. That's just so indicative of exactly what Jonathan is saying. And not only on this issue, but I think the president is really trying to rally voters, saying that even if abortion isn't a thing that is going to get you to the polls, the way this opinion, this leaked opinion, was drafted shows that this could happen to other issues. Basically, if you have the Supreme Court going back on long established precedent on things like gay marriage, for example, then all of a sudden, all of that could be up in the air. It could be left to the states. The president's hoping that will galvanize people and get them to the polls. But I will say that if you look at how the draft opinion was structured, they do say, Alito says, that this is a specific issue and that there's no right other than abortion that they think that it is time to roll back president on, that they see this as a specific topic, that they see that there's a right to do that. But there's a lot at play here, and I think that it really could continue to galvanize voters and bring them to the polls. We also have to remember there are a lot of other issues. There's the economy, there's the ongoing war with no end in sight, there's inflation. There's so much more that could actually, bring voters to the polls. And as we heard this week, I think Lindsey Graham commented on the fact that there are actually very few single issue voters out there. But this could certainly be one that energizes people. And I think the Biden administration is hoping that as a result of this, the midterms won't be so much a referendum on President Biden, but will really be a matter of, blue versus red values and what values voters will hold, and that will drive them to the polls rather.
And Josh, as Julia is talking about the midterms, this week we saw former President Trump's grip on the GOP was on full display in Ohio and in Indiana. Most candidates he endorsed won key primary races, chief among them J.D. Vance, of course, who's an author and venture capitalist. What I'm really interested in is the fact that President Trump, he's not taking this big victory lap. He's sort of saying, I'm going to wait and see what happens. What does that say about sort of how conservatives are approaching this as the midterms are approaching?
Well, there is this nervousness all of a sudden on the part of Republicans. We saw it, both you're talking about Trump seeming to be a little nervous about which races should he now take credit for as we go into the general election. You have to wonder if political advisors are telling him or telling the candidates that in the general election, he might potentially be a liability. And we're also seeing this with Republicans in Washington over this potential, revocation of the Roe v. Wade precedent. It was really fascinating that Republican lawmakers wanted only to talk about the leak of Politico and whether it was illegal and that it should be investigated. And they didn't seem to want to talk about this historic victory that the conservative legal movement seems to be on the verge of, turning over a 50-year-old precedent. And you have to wonder, are they concerned that maybe the poll numbers don't look that good for them?
We only have a couple minutes left, but I want to go to you really quickly for 30 seconds, your reaction to what he's talking about, especially with the great reporting in this book.
Well, I wanted to link Roe versus Wade and the results of the Ohio primary. There's a reason, Yamiche, we called the book This Will Not Pass. I think there was this expectation among a lot of Americans, certainly on the left or center left, that, hey, after Trump is gone, everything's going to be okay. And that's yesterday's news. And I think that this potential opinion from the court and Trump being able to engineer the Ohio Senate primary shows that this will not pass, that Trumpism and the larger forces of tribalism and polarization that are shaping our politics today are ongoing. The story has not ended. And that's part of the reason we wrote this book, was to sort of capture the fact that this didn't end on Election Day when Biden won. This is not something that is sort of yesterday's news. It is now and it's tomorrow. And it's the biggest story of our time.
And Abby, I wanted to just turn to another subject that wasn't connected to all of this, but there was some history made this week, apart from the big scoop from the Supreme Court, and that is that the White House just announced that Karine Jean-Pierre, she's going to be the first Black woman and first openly gay woman to be the White House press secretary. Politics aside, what do you make of this moment and her at the podium?
Yeah, this is a year of a lot of significant firsts for Black women, in particular, Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who will be seated this year. And this is yet another moment. I mean, the spokesperson for the government of the United States is a Black gay woman. And it's just another step forward in that element of progress, which is about just having these major roles in government, in politics, in law, being more representative of the whole country. And so the Biden administration, I think President Biden trying to make those significant moves, a Black vice president, Black woman vice president, Supreme Court justice, and now press secretary. It's significant, meaningful, and perhaps a nod to who he knows is a force behind him sitting in the White House in the first place, which is Black women who, as you know, Yamiche, and I know you know, J. Mart, really are they're the fuel behind a lot of the Democratic machine, especially in the South, but all across the country.
For Joe Biden especially, that's for sure.
And for Joe Biden especially.
For Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. Well, there was a lot to talk about, and I'm so grateful that all of you were here at this table. We're going to be continuing to talk about the politics of abortion and all of the things that are going on in the midterms. Thank you so much to Julia, Josh, Jonathan, and Abby for joining us and for sharing your reporting. We'll continue our conversation on the Washington Week Extra. Jonathan and his co-author, Alex Burns, talk about their newly released book, This Will Not Pass, Trump, Biden, and the Battle for America's Future. You can find it on our website, Facebook, and YouTube. And on Saturday on PBS News Weekend, a report from on the ground in Ukraine. And finally, this week marks 1 year since I became the moderator of Washington Week. I am so grateful to you, our viewers, and to the great journalists who join our program every week. Here's to many more Fridays. Good night from Washington.
Corporate funding for Washington Week is provided by...
For 25 years, Consumer Cellular has been offering no-contract wireless plans designed to help people do more of what they like. Our U.S.-based customer service team can help find a plan that fits you. To learn more, visit consumercellular.tv.
Additional funding is provided by Ku and Patricia YUEN through the YUEN Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose HIRSCHEL and Andy SHREEVES, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.